The NFL trade deadline is next Tuesday, and the Broncos are a little bit in no man's land, right? On one hand, sitting at 5-3, you would think they would be buyers. But on the other hand, they didn't come into this season with a lot of attention, spotlight from the national media of a legitimate playoff contender. So some believe that the Broncos won't be buying, but maybe the opposite, selling. So I want to unpack all of the latest NFL and Broncos trade rumors on today's episode, as ESPN came out with a really good article about what they are hearing going into NFL Week 9. And Jeremy Fowler said one team that could be surprise sellers, the Broncos. Here's what he said. Pass rusher Baron Browning, cornerback Damarri Mathis, and quarterback Zach Wilson are among depth players that teams consider potential trade candidates. Tight end Greg Dulcich has been a healthy scratch throughout October. So let's break down each one of these trade candidates one by one and talk about the likelihood of them getting dealt. We'll go from offense to defense, starting with Zach Wilson. Now, whenever we're talking about a midseason quarterback trade, we got to start with what teams are looking for a quarterback. And honestly, there really isn't a very long list. I mean, for starters, we're at the halfway mark of the season. There is only one starting quarterback from NFL Week 1 that is lost for the rest of the year, and that is Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. So there is not a long list of needy quarterback teams. I mean, you can make an argument for maybe the Giants long term, if they don't believe, which they shouldn't, that Daniel Jones is the solution. Las Vegas Raiders is not going to make a deal with the Broncos for a quarterback, but they definitely could use one. The Colts, after benching Anthony Richardson, I know they keep saying that this is not a long-term thing or they are not giving up on Richardson, but they're doing what's best for this year. That doesn't mean they might not want to bring in some more competition because Flacco at 39, 40 years old is definitely not their franchise QB for the next decade. The Titans, Will Levis sucks, so maybe they want to bring in some more competition again. Just start planting seeds for 2025. No team trading for Zach Wilson is doing it to maximize 2024. They are just looking in the future and realizing the quarterback we have right now is definitely not someone we should shoe in to be the starter for next year. So maybe we want to bring in some competition like Carolina for Bryce Young. So keep an eye on what could be a potential trade for not this year, but next year. I would keep Zach Wilson as the backup quarterback of the future. I felt like in the preseason, he showed a ton of growth from his time in New York as the starter, but I think the backup QB job is something that gets blown off too much by your average fan. And if you were to rank all 53 players on the roster in terms of importance, I think QB2 is probably somewhere between 30 to 35. So for me, I'm open to just holding on to Wilson. You're not going to get a crazy return to begin with. And I think you got what you wanted to see out of him when you made the trade. Like, I don't think anyone expected the Broncos to trade for Wilson for him to be the starter once they drafted Bo Nix. So you're already this far. He's shown, I think, really good improvement and growth, like I said, from his time in New York. Why give up now for a measly 6th or 7th round draft pick, right? You're not going to turn that into anything. I like Wilson as the backup for this team for years to come, so I would not trade him away. Now, before we look at the other 3 trade candidates, help us reach 27,000 subscribers. We are so close, just 80 subs away. If you are looking for an absolutely free Broncos YouTube channel, and I mean that completely free, hit that sub button down below. So trade candidate number 2 that Jeremy Fowler pointed to was tight end Greg Dulcich. This is a no-brainer. We haven't seen Dulcich play in a month. He has been a healthy scratch the last couple of weeks. So you're not going to get much for Greg, but why not? He's not giving you much right now. It's not like you desperately need him for depth at that position. He's not even a tight end 2 or a tight end 3 on this team. Unfortunately, the 3rd-round pick out of UCLA showed a ton of promise and a lot of flashes early in his career. I still remember that Chargers game on Monday night, but guy has been completely phased out of the offense. We are hardly seeing him touch the field, like I said. And so for me, if anyone's willing to give you even a 7th-round draft pick, that's one where you just go, sure, why not? Take that 7th. Are you going to get a tremendous player out of it? Probably not. Could you maybe use that 7th in a different trade? Sure, why not? Just look at it as like kind of like you're playing Monopoly, right? Sure, you want to get Boardwalk, but you'll take like the one, like the lighting one or the waterworks one where you kind of just collect like a measly tax on it. Just get something. You can use that asset in a different trade another day down the road. But I will say right now, the Broncos clearly need to target tight end early in the upcoming draft. I don't know what Denver's going to do in round one because it's very dependent on whether or not they bring back Garrett Bowles at left tackle or they re-sign Jonathan Cooper and or Baron Browning. I think tackle and edge rusher and also wide receiver are the front runners, but we have a long ways to go. But I'll tell you what they should do in round two, and that is take Michigan's tight end Colston Loveland. He is awesome. He is not going to put up monster numbers this year because Michigan is running an offense with a quarterback from like the 1920s that can't complete a forward pass. But in the NFL, I think Loveland's going to be a freak. So I like Colston Loveland for the Broncos in round two. Book it, screen record that right now. Come back to me in April when that happens. Before we look at the next two trade candidates for George and Sean Payton, I do want to give a quick shout out to our terrific sponsor today, which is Game Time. One thing I love about Game Time is they have this all-in pricing option. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront cost with no surprise fees at checkout. Game Time also has Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. You see, Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to only show you the best value and the best deals, so you don't spend hours searching for tickets across multiple sites. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CHAT Sports for $20 off. I put all that information in the comments and description of today's video. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. The next trade candidate, and probably the most notable of the bunch, is outside linebacker Baron Browning. Now, we've talked about a potential Browning trade for a couple of weeks now on the channel, so make sure to subscribe, stay ahead of the curve like this. But to me, it makes too much sense to not at least discuss the possibility of trading a guy who is no longer starting and has shown a lack of availability in back-to-back seasons and is in a contract year. Don't get me wrong, I like Baron Browning as a player. I think he's a good pass rusher. I think he has shown that if he has the ability to play a full 17-game season, he could be a guy who gets 8 to 10 sacks, and that's a really good thing in the modern NFL. But that's kind of a big if he could play 17 games. So currently he's not starting. I mean, he's been phased out a little bit with the emergence of Nick Bonitto, and it's unfortunate that once again he suffered a foot injury or leg injury that caused him to miss time for weeks on IR. But look at the snap count from like week 1 to week 7 and week 8 when he came back, and there's just not a huge role for Browning on this offense. So, defense, excuse me. So for the right offer, I am in on a trade for Baron Browning. I mean, I feel like the Broncos should at least explore the possibility of making a move because you've got some really good young players at that position, right? You could move on from Baron Browning and get Jonah Ellis a larger role on this defense. You've already got Nick Bonitto and Jonathan Cooper running as the top two linebackers from the outside on this defense. So you've got some good young pieces at that position that could get further development with some more snaps coming their way. Plus, along with the development of rookie Jonah Ellis, you'd also get some more draft picks. And right now, the Broncos have 6 picks going into the draft, and that's pretty middle of the pack. It's not crazy, but it's not too far below par. I mean, you got 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, no 5th. So if you could get a 5th-round pick for Baron Browning, for a guy that's on a contract year and maybe not be back in 2025 and isn't even starting on this team, to me it makes a lot of sense. Now, the other side would be, well, what if something were to happen to Cooper and Bonitto, and this is a team that's got playoff aspirations, and you just traded away a starter who's a backup on this team right now that could fill that void nicely? You'd be really shooting yourself in the foot for the future. And I can't disagree with that. Don't get me wrong, if something were to happen to Cooper or Bonitto, you'd be very comfortable having Browning kind of go back to being a starting edge rusher on this team. You feel like you wouldn't miss too much of a beat. But to me, I'm willing to kind of roll the dice on that a little bit. Get a solid draft pick because edge rushers always go for a decent chunk of change at the trade deadline. It's the number one position that teams want to stock up on. And you get Jonah Ellis, who I like a lot, on the field a little bit more and bring along his development, and he could have a huge role next year. If you bring back Cooper, it's Cooper, Bonito, and Ellis as your three-man wrecking crew from the outside. So let me know if you would trade Browning down below in the comment section. Give me a yes or give me a no. Fourth and final trade candidate, cornerback Damarri Mathis, former fourth-round pick out of Pitt. We all learned last year how starting Damarri Mathis went. It was an absolute disaster. They had to turn to Fabian Moreau. They go into this season, and they give the starting job to Riley Moss right out of the gate, and Moss has done a tremendous job since then. So now Mathis finds himself at the bottom of the depth chart. He's hardly seen the field so far this year. I somewhat go back to what happened with Greg Dulcich, which is if you could find someone that wants to trade for Mathis, by all means, go for it. You're not going to get much. I mean, we're talking about a day 3 pick swap where Denver trades Mathis and a 7th-round pick for a 6th-round draft pick. That's likely what you're going to get for him because you look at what he's done through 2 seasons of notable work, 2022 and 2023, and the numbers may not seem all that bad, like only 362 yards allowed. That's 362 yards allowed in the first 7 weeks of the season before he got benched. You expand that over a 17-game season, and Mathis last year, unfortunately, was playing as one of the worst cornerbacks in football. Denver had to make a move, and now he's just, I wouldn't say collecting dust, but he's just sitting at the bottom of the depth chart. So similar to Greg Dulcich, if you can find someone willing to make a trade for you, I'm all ears. Are you going to find someone willing to make a trade for a guy who's been a healthy scratch the last couple of weeks, or a cornerback who was one of the worst last year and had to get benched and has only played 12 defensive snaps so far? Unlikely. Maybe, but probably not. So don't think of those guys as players you can get good draft picks for. Chances are you aren't going to get much, if anything, for them at all. So with the NFL trade deadline next Tuesday, what do you think Denver should do? Should they buy? Should they sell? Or should they stay still? I think you can make really good arguments for all three right here. I think on tomorrow's episode, we'll talk about some of the players they could look to trade for. I know Broncos country was pretty bummed that Denver did not go after Deontay Johnson, given how cheap it was. So we'll talk about a receiver target or a running back, because there's some murmurs out there about going out and getting a pass-catching running back for Sean Payton like he had with Alvin Kamara. So let me know what you think the Broncos should do down below. That's going to do it for us on today's episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you all later.